Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is Sunday morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, April 4th, Easter Sunday, and I'm glad to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is up to us, and we're on for half an hour. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast, and we're just going to continue on with the Survivor to Thriver workbook that I found at ASCA, the Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, a Morris Center program at www.ascasupport.org, and you can pull up the Survivor to Thriver workbook. And it is 115 pages long. We are on page 92, and this workbook is awesome. They provide this workbook for anyone who wants to go through it. They do have a safety first chapter, which is the first 34 pages of the workbook, and they actually suggest that everyone go through the safety first portion of the workbook first, just to make sure that you're safe enough to be listening to this, because survivors of child abuse are all healing at different stages, and it depends on how far you've come in your healing process. When you're going through these different steps, there's 21 steps, and we're on step 11 right now. So you might want to just sort of go through that Survivor to Thriver workbook through the first chapter, the safety first chapter, and just make sure that you are safe enough to even do the workbook. That's their recommendation, because they really feel that they don't want people to regress in their healing. They want people to move forward, of course. That's the whole purpose, right? And so we want to make sure that we're moving forward at a slow and steady pace, not too fast for what we can handle. And so if you haven't come a long way in your healing process from child abuse, issues that surround it, then you might want to not listen to the show, just turn it off and go and do the workbook with a group setting, really. They actually suggest that people do the workbook in a group setting if they haven't come very far, because it's so nice to have that support, someone there to help you if something triggers you or you're just feeling really bad about something. Group support is really good, or your therapist or counselor, someone who you trust, a friend who has been with you the whole time, like through your healing process. So important, right? We want to make sure we're in a safe place when we're doing the workbook. It can cause a lot of emotions to come back and a lot of feelings, and so you want to know where you are in your healing process when you're listening to my show. First of all, I cover everything from every topic related to child abuse and human rights abuse, is really domestic violence, domestic abuse, just all different types of abuse subjects and topics, and so you want to make sure you're comfortable with the topic, and if not, please turn the show off. You have to listen at your own discretion, please. And if you're a young person under the age of 18, you might want to get someone to listen to the show with you, because really, I don't know where the players are now, and I fight for child rights. I stand up for online child safety. It's such a huge issue, and if you need to get educated and aware of what's really going on out there with children. There's all kinds of child sexual predators out there doing all kinds of manipulative things to try to get a hold of children. So you want to make sure that that someone knows what you're listening to and what you're looking at and who you're talking to online. Very important. You could save your own life, and you could really honestly, you could save your friends' lives by telling them to do the same thing. It's so important. I am going to be doing a topic on online safety here pretty soon, and it's so important. You can find information regarding online safety just by typing into your browser child online safety, children online safety, any of those things will bring up websites with information regarding how to stay safe online, what to do and what not to do. And that, if you're a young person, you might want to have an adult listen to this show, because they can tell you whether or not they think you should be listening to it. The subjects of abuse are very kind of scary, especially if you don't hear too much about it. And then you might have questions and you won't know where to go get help. So someone who's older, a counselor, a therapist, a family member, if you have a parent who cares, which I pray you do, they might be able to help you get the information, right? So it's so important. This is not a professional show. I don't hold any professional counseling certificates or therapist certificates. I'm just a person who sits on Blog Talk Radio. I'm a child rights, child abuse prevention advocate, and I stand up for children when children cannot stand up for themselves, which they can't normally. And so, your safety is number one. And so you want to make sure you have someone listen to this show with you, just to make sure you should be listening. And so we're going to continue on, and we'll just look at step 11. We looked at step 11 yesterday. We sort of went through it, but we didn't finish it. And step 11 is, I can identify faulty beliefs and distorted perceptions in myself and others. It's on page 92 of the Survivor to Thriver workbook at www.ascasupport.org, and you can pull this up. and follow along if you like. I throw my own stuff in there every now and then so people can see what one survivor's view is on this material. And of course, you might relate to some of it, and some of it you might not relate to at all. We've all been through different things and suffered different kinds of abuse, and I know some things I can relate to and some things I can't because I didn't experience it. But it's still good to know. The education portion of it is so important. And if you're a person who, excuse me, who supports child abuse survivors, adults who have survived child abuse, then this is really helpful because you can see why abused children do what they do, and also why adult survivors do what they do. So it's very helpful in that respect, I think. So we'll continue on. Step 11, I can identify faulty beliefs and distorted perceptions in myself and others. It says this, we already looked at this, but we'll just go over a little bit of it. This step is focused on changing the faulty thinking, attitudes, and beliefs about yourself and your past that continue to shape your view of the world. Given that the thoughts and attitudes born of your abuse will never really favor you, it is essential that you learn to challenge the internal tapes that are likely still playing in your head. And it says, because their childhood experience has often been extreme, many survivors become victims of their own misconceptions. And for a few examples of this tendency are, 1, splitting everything into good and bad, or thinking in black and white. Number 2, discrediting the positive aspects of yourself or your efforts. Like, for instance, they give an example, if it isn't perfect, then it's nothing. And then number 3, magical thinking or attributing some outcomes to factors that are not relevant. And they give an example here, I was born under the wrong stars, so nothing will ever change. Or, I got lucky once doing this, so all I need to do is repeat myself. And number 4, basing conclusions on initial impressions or circumstantial evidence rather than balanced objectivity. Like, they give an example, I don't know why I did it, I thought this guy had it in for me. And number 5, personalization, assuming responsibility for something caused by other people or factors. And number 6, magnification and minimization, either making something catastrophically important or excessively diminishing its importance. There may be other types of distortions that you still fall prey to, perhaps more out of habit than anything else. And it says, first, familiarize yourself with the patterns that you use and practice, identifying them when they occur, and then using your newly developed self-awareness, stop yourself so that you can short-circuit the patterns before they can do damage to you. Lastly, devise techniques to help you internalize corrected attitudes about yourself. And then they have a self-help portion. That's where we left off yesterday. They have a self-help recommendations and also professional help recommendations for each one of their steps, right? And we're on step 11. And so they said here, number 1, read back over your journal and see what distortions in thinking, perceptions, and attitudes you have had about yourself. Notice the obvious patterns. Are there any common themes in these distortions as regards to behaviors and feelings? And this is like if we were keeping a journal, we could go back over it and look and see what types of distorted thinking or perceptions and attitudes that we had about ourselves. We would be able to notice patterns and hopefully see some patterns there, and then we would know how to sort of change, what to change, right, as far as distorted thinking goes, right? And number 2, the most basic skill for you to learn is the ability to stand back and view events and situations from a broader perspective, so as to become more objective in your perceptions, beliefs, and judgments. This skill is essential because this analytical ability is called into play in virtually all aspects of your life. It can make the difference between repeating old habits and choosing new ways of looking at things. And that's where we sort of left off. I was talking about that yesterday, because that's what I did. I sort of sat back instead of looking at what had happened with so much anger and so much, hatred in my heart. I thought, I have to look at this as a whole big picture, take a look at what happened in our family, how it started, first of all, with my parents, and then why they did what they did, and then why we all did what we did. And it really helped me to do that because I was able to see the big picture instead of just looking at one part of it, which was the abuse, that I suffered from, especially from my mother, a little bit from my father, and the abuse that they inflicted, or so the way that they treated each other. My parents were very hateful towards each other the whole time I was born and growing up. So there was no normal interaction with them unless they were going out to someone's home to visit. So that's the only time we would see any kind of normal interaction between our parents, is if we got invited to someone's house for dinner, or if they were going out for some special occasion like someone's wedding or something. If they got invited to, they would try to maintain for that, and then as soon as we were back in the car, it would all start again. So they were able to hold it together for a few hours, and then after that, it was just back to the same old thing. So it was interesting to take a look at why they did what they did and how the family ended up in the mess that it did. And by taking a look at the bigger picture, I was able to see the dysfunction, because before I had done that, I was really only concentrating on certain portions of it, which was my anger towards my mother, and the replay tapes that keep replaying in my head, which they have been for years. That was more the focus. But as soon as I started looking at the whole big picture, it really helped to put it in place and helped me to be able to heal and move on from it. And number 4, it says here, number 3. We need to cover number 3. Whenever you uncover some distortion in your thinking, attitudes, or beliefs, try to determine the reality of the situation and then use this as a standard against which to evaluate your thought processes. Don't assume you know something that you really don't. You may have to make a particular effort or engage in some specific activity in order to access the information you need. By learning to identify what is objectively true, you can determine the validity of your previously held beliefs and then substitute a less distorted version. And number 4, ASCA meetings might be good environments in which to talk about the negative internal tapes that still play in your head. You might also share some of your success in identifying and changing faulty beliefs and distorted perceptions. So that's if you were attending an ASCA meeting, or if we were, right? If your city hosts ASCA, then there's meetings and stuff. My city doesn't host ASCA. I've already checked into it because I would have definitely gone and been a member. But there is online support there. If you go on their website, you can see that they have online support, peer support, and different things like that. So I might actually check into the online support portion of this, because I think it would be so helpful. I belong to a couple of adult survivor groups, and one is women's only, and then there's another one that I belong to as well. And they're awesome because you can really, when you're not having a great day and you're just feeling really down, there's usually someone there who will, they're in their healing process too. So they're always happy to help out, to be a shoulder, to listen. They understand what it's like to be feeling the way that you do. Even if you didn't experience the same types of abuse, you can still relate to the fact of how hard it is to work through some of the stuff. And so it's always nice to have someone who actually can empathize with you, not necessarily sympathize, but empathize and understand where you're coming from. So the group support is awesome, and I think the online support is awesome. I've really enjoyed using the 2 sites, and the people that I met were just awesome, and I care very much about them, and just like they want me to succeed in my healing process and go the whole way 100%. That's how I feel for them, that they would come out of this feeling whole and healthy and happy and have a good life, right? So important. So professional help recommendations that they suggest for this chapter 11 are, number 1, what kind of distortions has your therapist pointed out to you in the past? Share your ideas about this and discuss with your therapist which ones still present problems for you. And number 2, use your therapy sessions to help you refine your thinking and decision-making style. You can do this by discussing specific situations that are currently giving you problems. With the help of your therapist, delve into these situations and see what kind of perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs they may reveal. Considering that feelings may significantly disrupt this process, you may need to work very slowly and deliberately and to practice regularly if you are to identify and minimize your patterns of distortion. So it's quite interesting, that whole topic there. Because when you grow up in an abusive home, if you're suffered, through especially year after year, you develop these distorted beliefs about yourself and about the abuse and about your world, right? And I know I did. My dad was borderline schizophrenic. He still is, and his thinking mechanisms were just not healthy. And my mom was manic depressive, so everything that she thought was, it was always just down, down. Everything was always a downer. Life was a downer. Life was no good. And for my dad, everybody was out to get us. So when you grow up hearing this, and it sort of warps your sense of, it sort of distorts your thinking and stuff, and which it did. It took me a long time to actually get over a lot of that. And especially my teen years, when your mind really is having a hard time anyway in your teen years, and then to have this extra stuff to have to work through to decide what is really real and what is not, what is As far as like in life, are people really out to hurt us? You know what I mean? And then if your parents are always hurting you, then of course you're almost gonna think that it's true. And you have to kind of work through and learn how to think, in a positive manner, learn how to make good decisions for yourself, right? And I know I've had to deal with that for my whole life, right? We'll move on to step 12. I am facing my shame and developing self-compassion. And this is page 94 of the Survivor to Thriver workbook at www.ascasupport.org. And step 12, I am facing my shame and developing self-compassion. Shame is a general term that encompasses all of survivors' negative feelings about themselves. It is also the psychological source of self-sabotage. Unlike guilt, which is the result of feeling bad about what you do in the external world, shame reflects feelings of failure inside as a person. Shame is experienced as self-blame. You perceive yourself as flawed, inferior, contemptible, no good. Considering how little you probably received as a child, shame, like anger, is a normal feeling. The problem is that you have way too much of it. Shame is the part of you that you can't face because it is so intolerable. In the words of John Bradshaw, toxic shame is an emotion that gets internalized as a state of being. And they went on to say here, excuse me, adult survivors begin to internalize shame when they identify with parents who abuse them, abandon them, and fail to validate them as people. The shame becomes part of a package of self-blame, bad feelings, self-destructive thoughts, and self-sabotaging behaviors. During the childhood years, this bundle of negative feelings evolves into a major part of the survivor's sense of self. As you go through life, this negative part gets reinforced by other people, external events, and even yourself if you tend to defend against the feelings triggered by the abuse by turning against yourself. And they said the second part of this step involves developing acceptance and self-compassion for who you are, what you have overcome, and the efforts you are now making to live a healthier life. It is important that you remember that you developed this self-blaming behavior as the result of being told, directly or indirectly, that you were somehow bad. In a very real sense, you are not responsible for the initial seeds of self-blame, although you may have aggravated your situation by internalizing your abuser's blame and turning it against yourself. In addition to accepting these self-defeating tendencies, you need to develop compassion for yourself. You certainly weren't responsible for the abuse that occurred to you. You probably couldn't help but turn the blame inwards. You are now making earnest efforts to recover and heal. For all these reasons, you need to be kind to yourself, to recognize that you are a valuable person, and to start to turn some of your self-loathing into compassion and acceptance. And that's huge. That is so important because, when you grow up and abused and told repeatedly, horrible things by your caregivers or parents, it does have an effect on you, I know, because I carried a lot of that with me for so many years, and this self-worthlessness and just this self-loathing, I couldn't stand my own skin. I really wanted out of my own body, you know what I mean? It's a horrible thing what parents do to children, and I don't think that my mom knew what she was doing. She was abused herself, and that's how she was treated. So she did not get help, and so she just passed the cycle on down to us. And it really did have an effect on us. My brother killed himself at the age of 33, drug overdose. My other brother had a drug overdose at the age of 43 in a shelter here in Calgary. And so they were treated a lot like I was. They were older than me, and my mother treated them probably pretty much the same. As I was growing up, I could see and hear, and I knew what was going on. So it wasn't just me being abused in the home. There was a lot of us who were taking every kind of abuse, really, that she was dishing out, physical, emotional, psychological, verbal. And my dad was very abusive towards my brothers, as far as even, verbal as well, but physical as well, and psychological. And it was just horrible, the damage that's done. We have to get help, we can't, if we're suffering along, like I did for so many years, I didn't reach out and get any help, right? And so I continued on in this internalized self-loathing and self-anger about the whole thing. I can still hear my mother's voice as she's cursing me and telling me these horrible things. I still hear it in my head. Her voice plays over like a radio, like I guess you might call it a CD that just stays on all the time. And but I actually learned how about 3 years ago, I would say just before, maybe about 3.5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to fight to live instead of fight to die. You know what I mean? I was like, no, I'm going to fight to live. I want to have a good life. Like that's what I had started out to do at the age of 21, and then 20 years later, I'm still fighting through. And I thought, why am I not making progress? Why am I sitting here suffering in silence? I'm not doing anything about it. I'm not, I want to have a good life, so I'm going to have to fight for this good life. I want to fight to live and not end my life and not destroy my life and not self-harm. I had so much self-loathing and anger and hatred in my heart, right, for what had happened. Not necessarily for my parents, but for what they did. And so, it was so hard. But I finally realized that once I actually started to realize that I wanted to have a good life, I thought, hey, I deserve a good life. And all of a sudden, I started to realize I didn't deserve any of that abuse that I took. And I started to acknowledge it and work through it and realize that it wasn't my fault. And that, what my mother had told me was not true. I was not worthless. I was not a bad kid. I was not stupid. I started to realize that I needed to love myself. So I had to really work on being good to myself and feeling good about myself, as a person on this planet. And I thought, yeah, I like myself. So why am I doing this to myself? You know what I mean? I was actually continuing on the abuse that my mother had and my dad had done to me for so many years before. So yeah, it's so important. We have to learn how to really be compassionate for ourselves, to learn how to love that child that was abused and to learn how to love ourselves for who we are now. And especially if you're just working through and just starting out your healing process, it's so important to reach out, to yourself, right? We can't just overlook that. We have to really learn how to love ourselves and realize that what happened to us was not our fault, and continue working through slowly at a good steady pace, just to learn kind of what helps us to feel better. And I used to do a lot of self-affirmations. I'd wake up and look in the mirror in the morning and whatever, and I'd say, I deserve a good life. I do count, I do matter, because my mother, at the age of 30, after years of abuse, finally told me that none of us counted, none of us mattered. She had a chance to let us all go. We were going to be removed from the home when I was a young child, and she told the courts that she wanted to keep us all. We were all she ever had, and that she didn't want to lose her children, and then put us through years of abuse, and then at the age of 30 finally told me that we didn't matter to her at all. And I thought, oh my God, we went through all of this just for you to tell me this, you know what I mean, that we were worthless and we didn't count and we didn't matter. So it spun me into another 10 years of kind of depression and self-loathing and anger. And so I started to realize, I thought my mother was sick. That was not my fault. She was sick and she needed help. She didn't get help. So I stopped looking at it as something that I stopped taking it on myself. And I started to think, no, I didn't deserve that. I'm a good person, and I didn't deserve any of the abuse that we took. None of us did, none of my family members. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to have to learn how to love myself. And I had to reach in towards that little inner child who was still very much suffering and angry, and nurture her. I didn't get that as a child, so I needed to learn how to do that myself. So I started to take a look at my inner self, right? Excuse me, my voice is really bad this morning. So, yeah, I started to take a look at that inner child who was just raging and seriously injured, and I had to learn how to love her. You know what I mean? As ugly as she was, because that's how I felt about myself. I felt very ugly and worthless and like I didn't matter and I shouldn't have been on the earth. I never should have been born. This is what I was told when I was young. And so I started to really work through that, and I tell you, it really helped to develop that sense of self-worth and that we do matter, we do count, and we have to reach out and get that help. If you really haven't done a whole lot of, like I didn't get any counseling or anything like that, but I started reaching out to group support and online group support, and people I found, as soon as I put my hands out there to reach out, all of a sudden everybody was reaching back out to me, and I thought that was so awesome. I'd never experienced that in my entire lifetime, so it was so great. And I'll continue on here. They said, considering that shame is probably deeply embedded in your sense of self, it will take a lot of courageous work to uncover it, examine it, and begin to transform it into self-acceptance. But it can be done. By working with your support network and sharing your feelings with other people whom you trust, you can begin to internalize a different, more accepting message about yourself. And to continue self-blaming is to do to yourself as an adult what was done to you as a child. You must sever this legacy by changing what you say to yourself, how you treat yourself and how you let others treat you. That is so important. We have to change this thing. That's what I thought. I thought, boy, nobody's going to do this for me. I have to do it myself. I have to change the way I feel about myself. I have to change the way I feel about what happened to me as a child. I have to change I have to change the way I feel about what happened to my family, because it was killing me, and it was going to kill me. Had I continued on in that, I seriously believe that at some point I would have taken my life as my brother did. Or I wasn't going to go back onto drugs. I quit drugs at the age of 21, but I thought, hey, there's other ways. I was not planning, but I was planning my own suicide. I was sort of thinking of ways to do it, and over the course of many years. So I started to think, hey, I need to fight to be alive. I want to win this fight, because what came over me was that if I actually do that, or self-harm and self-injure, then my parents win. They won when my brother committed suicide, and they also won when my other brother died of a drug overdose. And so I thought, hey, I'm not going to let those guys win. No way. I am winning this. I win the fight, because I stay alive, and I am going to go on to have a great life, and then I win the fight. So that was a big thing for me to realize that. And I hope that if you're suffering along with situations in your life of being abused as a child, that you will want to win this fight too, and to stay alive and stay well, move past it, get well, get help, have a good life that you deserve. Because if we allow ourselves to go down because of the abuse that we suffered as a child, then our abusers win, whether it was our parents or whoever it was, right? If we allow them to destroy us, then they win. And so that's why it was a big issue for me, because I'm like a dog with a bone. I was like, no way, I'm winning this fight. I'm going to have a good life, and I'm going to work past this, move past it, and learn how to love myself and how to love this life, and how to try to do whatever I can to get involved and help people out, or in any way that I can, right? They have some self-help recommendations along with this portion. It says, read any of several available books and articles on shame and its debilitating effects. Number 2, learn to identify the feeling of shame as it occurs in your daily life, and write in your journal about situations that trigger shame. This is a good idea, I think. Number 3, reach out to others for help in learning to act differently in situations that trigger shame. By assertively affirming your strengths and admitting your weaknesses, you will counteract internal shame and arrest the shaming process in your everyday life. You will also begin to accept yourself, good parts and not so good ones, as a valuable person. We do count. We do matter. I'm telling you, if you're suffering through with this, I'm telling you, you have to believe that. I mean, no one was telling me, count, you matter, I didn't have a friend actually on the planet except for my sweetheart, and thank God for him. But no one else was sitting around saying, hey, you can do it, you can count, you count, you do matter. I had to do that myself. And I would have gone to my grave, had I not changed the way that I felt about myself as a very sad person who really felt very worthless. So I'm so glad that I did that. And I did it by just looking in the mirror and being honest with myself and saying, yeah, I do count. I do matter, and I do deserve to have a good life, and I did not deserve to be abused as a child. So it's so important, right? Number 4, recall the people in your childhood who had something good to say about you. What words did they use to describe your best qualities? How did you feel when you were around them? Revive these important people from your past by writing about them in your journal and exploring what their support meant to you then and now. And I did that. There was one family that stepped in when I was 13 and a half. They were going to intervene on my behalf, and they were so good. They really showed me that I was a good kid at that point. I didn't carry it on into my adulthood. That's the whole issue. But I remembered in the back of my mind that this family really was the only family that was there for me, to actually stand behind me and to say, hey, you're a good kid, you didn't deserve this. And they treated me as one of their own for a couple of years, and I saw them not too long ago, a few years back, and they're just awesome people, and they just truly loved me. And my own parents didn't even love me, you know what I mean? So, these people were awesome. And we have about a minute left. We'll finish the rest of this another time, probably Monday night. So I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, volunteer position. I'm so happy to stand with them. And you can check their website out, www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. And there's all kinds of great information on there regarding child abuse, for instance, signs and symptoms, how to report child abuse, what is child abuse, all the different kinds of child abuse. There's links and resources on there. There's all kinds of stuff for parents who are struggling. There's information for people who need it, who work with children. For instance, school counselors, teachers, pediatricians who want more information regarding abuse and child abuse, what to look for. So make sure you check their website out. And I have a book out. It's called A Life of Death, The Redemption. And you can find it at Sheeran Potter Books at lulu.com. And, excuse me, it is my personal story. All the proceeds are going to Dream Catchers for Abused Children to help stop child abuse. And the book is dedicated to my two brothers, Rob and Howard, who committed suicide and overdosed from a drug overdose, who went to their graves in shame and silence. And I'm glad to be their voice. So I hope you will pick up a copy. And it's really a book about hope at the end. It's a book about hope and having hope, keeping the hope alive, and keep reaching out. So that's I just pray and hope that you will keep reaching out. Take care of yourselves, everybody. I'll be back on tomorrow morning. Actually, I'll be back on tonight, Mount Bethel Christian Fellowship, Worship and Fellowship Center, and I'll be back on tomorrow morning, one child abuse survivor to another, at I think 5:30 or 6 o'clock. I'll see, because I'm not sure if I'm going to change the time or not. So take care, everybody. Happy Easter, and have a good day. Bye-bye.